increasing testing resources, challenges with the supply chains, and further travel restrictions inside the EU. State of emergency, day 6, Tallinn, Estonia. It's the 18th of March 2020, Wednesday. And Jüri Ratas, the Prime Minister of Estonia, has informed that we are now aiming to get our testing capabilities up to 1,000 tests per day. That's the goal from Friday or onwards from there. But also, not only does that depend on the testing, the diagnostical equipment, that also depends on the protective gear. We already know that we have problems with the supply chains. I'll elaborate a bit later. The question is not only how many tests can we analyze in the lab, it's about how much protective gear do we have, how many masks, how many protective suits, goggles, and so forth. Obviously, we know by now that using the ambulance for testing is unsustainable, so they're working on new methods, how to create testing centers where they could take tests in a larger number. As you can see from the chart here taken from koroonakaart.ee, the testing capabilities are clearly increasing, slowly but steadily. So in the previous 24 hours, they were able to do 395 tests, which brought 33 new cases. It's close to 10%, more like 8.4, but currently approximately 10% is the positive test result rate that they're expecting. So we'll see if they increase the number of testing, will that rate stay the same or increase or decrease. I started taking the numbers a week ago on Wednesday, the 11th of March, so we can see how the numbers have changed during this first week that I've paid attention. So we started with 17 total cases, and by now we have 258 total cases. That means the numbers have increased over 15 times. That's the danger of exponential growth, but it should be slowing the further we go. As you can see, the cases per million people in Estonia is a bit larger than the European average. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that the spread is worse in Estonia. It might also show that Estonia has actually been fairly good with testing. We have done 1,520 tests per million people. So there are some countries that have done more, but also a lot of countries that have done less. If we look at Europe, then a week ago, the total number of cases was 17,000. By today, it's more than 70,000. So that's a fourfold increase. With the current trends, we have to get used to the fact that we're going to get daily updates with more than 10,000 new cases in Europe, as well as more than 500 daily deaths. The fatality rate, as unnerving as it is slowly but steadily growing. Now, these are just numbers, but numbers don't lie. I can't really make any big conclusions from it. I'm not a mathematician, I'm not an epidemiologist, I'm not a doctor, I'm just your average Joe. But the question remains that does this reflect the impact on the healthcare system? So the more people need treatment, the more there is strain on the medical system, and the less resources that are available to treat the critically ill. We can see an increase in the fatality percentage also if we look at the numbers globally. So Estonia weekly increase approximately 15 times, Europe a bit more than 4, and the world a bit less than doubled. But the trend is still clearly growing, so the statement from the health board a few days ago that it seems like the growing trend has already been passed was premature to say the least. While we're hoping that it won't get a lot worse, in reality we have to brace ourselves. Keep in mind that the stats I'm using are taken from the ECDC website and they are updated daily at 8 o'clock in the morning, so actually they reflect the situation the previous day. The latest numbers actually show that there are more than 200,000 cases totally around the world, including more than 8,000 deaths. These numbers are taken from the Hopkins University and Medicine's Coronavirus Resource Center, an online source that I know a lot of you are using. And if you're not familiar with it, you can find the link below in the video description. Regarding supply chains, the health board is already admitting that they are struggling with securing deliveries. For example, the North Estonia Medical Center were waiting shipments from the UK and the Netherlands, but by now that they know that these deliveries have been cancelled. So a lot of countries in Europe are decreasing the exports of medical equipment, and this will affect the situation here as well. A lot of cargo is still stuck on the Polish border. There are lines up to 40 kilometers. The main international cargo route is the E67, which connects Helsinki through Tallink, Riga, Kaunas and Warsaw with Prague. So since a lot of international goods come to the Baltics through Poland, then it's vital to resolve this crisis. At the moment, the drivers who are waiting on the borders are spending up to 3 nights in their trucks. That's clearly madness. To decrease the strain on the supply chains, for example on the Estonian and Latvian borders, the truck drivers don't have to fill the health forms anymore. So this should hopefully fasten the flow of food as well as medical equipment, which are prioritized. The Estonian Food Industry Association offered their recommendations for the government how to guarantee a long-term supply and production of food. Most local producers have reserves for a couple of months to keep up the production, but after that things become problematic. The food industry is also facing shortages of protective gear for their food safety. They also direly need testing equipment to ensure that the production of the larger producers wouldn't suffer. Movement of goods is once again critical because a lot of companies rely on shipments from Latvia, Lithuania and Finland to keep up their food production. I mentioned one of the main ferries, shuttle ferries between Tallinn and Helsinki, used to be the Star. Well, the news is that Star is becoming a cargo ferry. I mean, Tallink, the ferry company, definitely has interesting challenges these days. Just a couple of weeks ago I actually took the Star myself to Helsinki, and by now it's doing cargo trips from Sassnitz to Paldiski, which is an important port town about 50 kilometers west from Tallinn. Sassnitz, you might remember, is the name of the small town in northern Germany where another Tallink ferry called Romance is heading to right now to pick up the Estonians who got stranded on the German-Polish border. So Tallink and the government are doing a lot of work to circumnavigate the whole Polish situation. International travel is becoming more and more difficult. We know that a lot of people in Estonia are actually working in Helsinki, so they use the ferry connections really frequently. The Foreign Ministry tried to find a solution how to keep the window still open for these people, but the negotiations between the two countries have led to a sort of paradoxical outcome. If you are an Estonian worker who has a work contract in Finland, then you are allowed in the country without being quarantined. There's only one clause: you have to return to Estonia within 1 week. But when you return to Estonia, then you will be quarantined for 14 days. So effectively, the frequent travel between the two countries is halted. We'll see whether they figure out a workaround for this, because clearly this is not what they wanted. At the same time, the EU will close the Schengen borders for at least 30 days. The travel ban will affect all non-EU nationals from visiting the bloc except long-term residents. This also excludes family members of EU nationals, diplomats, healthcare workers, cross-border workers and people transporting goods. So far about 1,000 Estonians have made it back here, thanks also to the work of the Foreign Ministry. But a couple of hundred people remain abroad, and the Foreign Ministry is working out solutions how to get everyone back home. Well, everyone who wants to come back home, or everyone who actually can come back home because they might be quarantined in another country. Finally, as you might remember, in the first days there were calls for people to spend more time outdoors, go hiking in the nice nature trails that we have, and just relieve the stress. Well, some of the trails and locations are more popular than others, like Viru Bog and Keila Park. The state's forest management center encouraged people to discover less known trails and locations and avoid the more crowded ones. They reminded people that there are hundreds of visiting sites and trails across the country, so all you need to do is some exploring. So head out to discover the hidden gems of nature and try not to get too stressed out, because in all likelihood, there's still a long way to go.